We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. Morning in the city center woke with the sound of fast footsteps on the pavement, glass doors opening and closing like clockwork. Brew and Bean sat on the corner, a place where white ceramic cups were stacked neatly and thin steam from the milk frother drifted across the counter. Outside, people hurried to work. Inside, the smell of freshly roasted coffee filled the air. Alyssa pushed open the door at 7:23 a.m. She always chose that time. It was early enough to get her favorite seat by the window, late enough for the cafe to hum with soft laughter. She set her canvas bag on the chair, slipped off her light coat, and ordered her usual hot Americano with a slice of lemon. The barista didn't need to ask, just nodded when he saw her and pressed the button on the machine. Her co-worker, who often stopped by Brew and Bean before heading to the office, was already there. He slid a pile of papers aside to make room for Alyssa's laptop. Outside, the sky still held a trace of fog. The buildings caught the first thin stripe of sunlight. "The new CEO starts today," her co-worker said quietly, as if gossip could increase the caffeine level. "Word is, he's cold as ice, punctual to the minute, hates impulsive people." Alyssa lifted her cup and smiled, one corner of her mouth curving. "Then I guess he and I won't get along." "You will," he said, chuckling. "You're just too direct." He glanced around the cafe. "Don't fire off your shots too early. If you do it today, everyone will see." Alyssa opened her laptop. The screen lit up with notes and graphs. She rested her chin on one hand, watching the crowd outside. Everyone rushing, everyone pretending they knew exactly what they were doing. Then a thought flickered through her mind, light and playful. She set her cup down, the faint scent of lemon cut through the bitterness. "The new CEO," she said aloud, "is probably just another uptight guy who couldn't handle a strong woman like me." Her words dropped into the air like a coin bouncing on a wooden table. Small, clean, and clear. Her co-worker nudged her under the table. "Keep it down." But Alyssa only arched an eyebrow, unbothered. She was used to joking without apology, to tease, to test reactions, to hide her cards behind humor. At the bar, the grinder's noise shifted tone, then stopped. Someone stood up from the table behind her, but Alyssa didn't turn around. The cafe was busier than usual. It was Monday morning after all. Then a shadow fell beside her table. Alyssa looked up. A man in a charcoal gray suit, slim fit, polished shoes reflecting the warm cafe lights. He didn't lean on the chair or touch the table, just stood close enough for his voice to reach her clearly. He glanced at her Americano, the corner of his mouth curving slightly, thin as a pencil mark. "Try me tonight." Everything paused for one heartbeat, so brief it could have been imagined, but long enough for Alyssa to feel her pulse skip. The barista's spoon clinked against a cup. Someone at the next table stopped mid-sentence. Her co-worker's eyes went wide, then quickly dropped to his notes. Alyssa stayed composed, as if she'd just been asked about the weather. She met the man's gray eyes, the kind that looked like sunlight glinting on cold water. "I'm sorry," she said evenly. "You must be mistaken. I don't accept invitations from strangers who don't introduce themselves." The man tilted his head slightly. His smile faded halfway. Not embarrassed, not smug, just measured. "Am I mistaken?" he murmured. Then after a beat, "I don't think so. Either way." He nodded once, fingers brushing the chair's edge like tapping an invisible rhythm. "We'll see each other again." He turned and walked away. The sound of his shoes on the tiled floor was soft, almost blending with the hiss of steaming milk. Alyssa watched without turning fully. What lingered wasn't his image, but the sense that his words had left an invisible exclamation mark on her morning. Her coworker whispered, "What just happened?" "Nothing," Alyssa said, taking a long sip of coffee. The hot liquid ran down her throat, dragging everything back into place. "Just a confident stranger." "And the tonight part?" "Tonight I'm busy, with myself," she replied. "No room for anyone else." She closed her laptop, stacked her papers, and stood. Before leaving, she took one last look at the familiar space, the wooden chairs, the warm lights, the smell of coffee. Alyssa smiled, the kind of smile for a joke perfectly timed. The next morning, the company's headquarters gleamed cold in the sunlight. The revolving doors greeted people like a handshake without warmth. Alyssa swiped her badge. The elevator opened. She adjusted her collar in the mirrored wall, reminding herself not to think about the cafe. The all-hands meeting at 9 required a clear head, and she didn't let strange encounters disrupt her schedule. 8:58. The top-floor conference room was full. Rows of chairs lined up neatly under bright white lights. On the screen, bold letters read, "Welcome to the new quarter." Quiet chatter rippled, small talk, polite smiles, practiced nods. Alyssa sat in the third row, notebook ready. Her heartbeat was steady. Her mind ran through a list of questions for the new guy: product strategy, performance metrics, resource allocation. She didn't care who was handsome or aloof. She cared who could handle the numbers. 9 o'clock. The door opened. A group of executives entered. Conversations faded into a polite hush. The last man in the group stepped forward toward the head of the table. When he turned to face the room, Alyssa heard someone's chair creak softly. Charcoal gray suit, neat tie, gray eyes. Alyssa didn't move. Her throat went dry, as if the air conditioning had suddenly turned up. The man stopped, resting both hands on the edge of the table. That same faint smile appeared, exactly like yesterday. A clear, formal voice announced, "Please welcome our new CEO." His name followed, David Sterling. Polite applause filled the room, brief, automatic. Alyssa sat straight, notebook untouched, eyes forward. In her mind, words lined up neatly. Brew and bean, gray suit, try me tonight, CEO. They didn't clash. They fit together, absurdly perfectly. David's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly at each row. When it passed over Alyssa, she didn't look down, didn't flinch. Her face was neutral, the thinnest mask she owned, letting others guess what they wanted to. "Good morning," he began, his voice low but clear, caring without effort. "I'll keep this short. Today I want to listen more than I talk. But first I'll say this. We'll work together based on data and on respect for those who dare to ask questions." Several heads nodded. Alyssa didn't. She turned a page in her notebook and wrote quietly in the corner, "Don't let a joke become a trap." David continued, "I'll meet each team after this session. The analytics group." He paused for half a second. "I'm looking forward to seeing your projections for next quarter." Alyssa's heartbeat steadied again. It was just another Monday morning, just another meeting room, just more numbers to get right. When the session ended and people began to shuffle out, Alyssa moved slower than the rest. She capped her pen, closed her notebook. As she lifted her head, David stepped back from the microphone. For an instant, their eyes met across the room. No smile, no nod, just a look long enough to acknowledge what both already knew. They had met before. Alyssa turned first, walking through the noise of chairs scraping and shoes shifting. She said nothing about the cafe. She didn't need to. Everything that needed saying would be said through work. As for "try me tonight," she tucked it into a small drawer in her mind and locked it. The key she kept in her pocket. She'd open it when the time came. But for now she had a meeting. The door closed softly behind her. The hallway gleamed and the elevator waited open. Alyssa stepped inside and glanced at her reflection in the steel wall. She slipped her hands into her coat pockets and drew a deep breath. The faint scent of coffee drifted through the building. She smiled, silently. One joke, one glance, one meeting, and a brand new day began. The meeting room on the 37th floor lit up exactly at 9:30. The long wooden table stretched across the space, the screen already showing the title slide, Quarter 2 Plan, Draft 01. Alyssa sat on the right side, 3 seats down from the head of the table. She opened her notebook and checked a few highlighted numbers. Small details she had circled the night before. The faint smell of coffee and ink mixed in the air. Chairs scraped, pages turned, and soft coughs repeated like a background rhythm. David walked in, not a minute late. He nodded instead of saying hello, unbuttoned his jacket, and took his seat. His eyes moved calmly over the faces in the room. "Let's start with retail," he said. "I suggest we open more stores in the Midwest, Kansas City, St. Louis, Omaha, to make up for slower growth on the East Coast. Rent is cheaper, and competition is lighter. The slide changed, showing three simple charts comparing costs, populations, and growth rates. Alyssa glanced at them, tapping her pen. The numbers were correct, but not complete. When David said make up for slower growth, she already saw two missing pieces: product returns and customer habits in each region. Thoughts? David asked, looking up. A polite second of silence passed before someone spoke. If the rent's lower, expanding could make sense, a manager said carefully. Alyssa straightened her back. I'd like to add something, she said, calm but clear. David gave a short nod. Go ahead. She stood and connected her laptop to the screen. The charts use cost and population data, she began, but I looked at two more factors: how often customers return products and how many use buy online, pick up in store. Her slide showed a simple color map of the states. In these Midwest areas, returns are almost 1% higher than in the East, and fewer customers use in-store pickup. That means running stores there will quietly cost more, because more returns slow everything down, and fewer pickups make stores less efficient. A few people leaned forward. David leaned back, listening. Alyssa clicked to the next chart. Here's a basic forecast, she continued. If we open new stores without improving returns or pickup speed, the expected revenue is about 7% lower than keeping things as they are. Someone frowned. But the population is growing. Alyssa nodded. Yes, but growth doesn't mean profit if shopping feels inconvenient. People here value ease more than discounts. If we start with more stores, we might just add more problems. The room went quiet. David rested his fingers on the table's edge, his eyes still on the screen. Then what's your suggestion? Do it the other way around, Alyssa replied. Before opening new stores, fix returns and pickup. Make it easy. No paper receipts, fast counters, under 4 minutes per customer. Promise a 15-minute pickup for online orders. Once returns drop below 3.5% and pickup rises above 35%, then expansion will pay off. A small laugh came from somewhere in the room. 4 minutes sounds a bit dreamy. Alyssa smiled faintly. Not really. We lose time checking receipts and staff approvals. Remove those steps, and 4 minutes is possible. David checked his watch, then looked at her again. On the screen, the cursor blinked, waiting. Alyssa closed her laptop and sat back down. Silence, one heartbeat long. Then David nodded slowly. Interesting, he said. Remind me not to underestimate you again. The faint tapping of someone's pen stopped. A few surprised looks went around. Alyssa sat upright. Thank you, she said simply. Inside, the tight string in her chest loosened. Just enough to feel proud, but not enough to relax. The meeting went on. David's voice stayed calm, the slides stayed cool, but the pace changed. His questions began turning toward Alyssa more often. A few more eyes in the room turned her way. When the final topic came, David said, We'll test the new return and pickup process in 2 states. Report back in 4 weeks. As papers shuffled, 2 coworkers whispered, She just challenged the boss. Brave move. The phrase spread quickly, invisible but sticky, clinging to Alyssa's jacket as she stood up. Out in the hallway, Jamie leaned close. You just saved us from wasting a fortune? Keep your voice down, Alyssa said, half smiling. In the elevator, her palms were still warm from the rush. Pride? Yes. Nerves? Also yes. Because moments like this always had a cost. Extra eyes, quiet gossip, and the next test waiting around the corner. The doors were about to close when a hand stopped them. David stepped in, standing to her right, a polite distance away. Their reflections overlapped faintly in the steel. Good presentation, he said, watching the floor numbers change. And, he paused, your facts were ahead of mine. Facts have their own way, Alyssa replied evenly. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like a mark he made in his mind. The elevator stopped on the 24th floor. He stepped out first, then glanced back briefly, just long enough to suggest that today's clash wasn't the end. Alyssa walked back to her desk under soft white lights. Behind her, someone joked again. The girl who challenged the boss. She didn't turn, didn't react. The phrase echoed in her head, half a metal, half a weight. In her inbox, a new meeting invite appeared. Return and pickup, pilot team. From David Sterling. Note, bring your numbers. Alyssa pressed accept. Pride kept her steady. Caution kept her humble. And the look in David's eyes, focused, not angry, reminded her. Today's clash wasn't about winning or losing. It was about opening a new door. And behind that door, she would still lead with logic. Everything else could wait. The email arrived in the morning. Alyssa would be working with David to prepare a partnership deal with a Japanese company. She stared at the line and let out a short breath. This wasn't something she chose, but it had to be done. From that day on, the meeting room turned into their home at night. The whiteboard was covered in writing, papers stretched across the table, and half-empty coffee cups stood in every corner. Hoshinari was meticulous, wanting everything explained clearly, every step justified. David liked to jump straight to the results. Alyssa, however, wanted to show how they got there, so the clients would trust them. Long nights followed. The clock ticked past 9, then 10, then 11. They debated nonstop. If we ask for a deposit, they'll feel pressured, Alyssa said. Don't call it a deposit, call it a performance guarantee, David replied. It means keeping promises. Fine. Just changing the name makes it sound softer. Then came the question of timing. Give them 7 days to review, Alyssa suggested. 5, David shook his head. We can't drag this out forever. 6.5? He looked at her. 6. She smiled. Deal. The air in the room was tight as a string. Yet the more they argued, the more they understood each other's way of thinking. David spoke little but worked fast. Alyssa was direct, never evasive. At times it felt like they were on the verge of fighting, only to lower their voices and fine-tune each word. Like two people slowly untangling a knot until the thread ran straight again. Near midnight, the light cast a weary yellow across their faces. Alyssa leaned back in her chair, twirling her pen. She looked at David and asked softly, "Do you always need to control everything?" David glanced up, the chill in his gray eyes softening. "Not everything," he said slowly. "Some things I just want to understand, not to hold on to." His answer fell into Alyssa's heart like a pebble in water. Ripples spread, touching a hidden place inside her, the fear of being boxed in, labeled, or replaced. She turned away, biting her lip to steady her pulse. "Then help me understand this," she said, shifting back to work. "If they want to look too deeply, we prepare a sealed box. They can see the outcome, not the core." David nodded. Agreed. The night moved on page by page. When they finally stood to pack up, Alyssa realized something quietly strange. They weren't close, and not yet trusting, but both had set down a piece of their pride to hold one thing steady, together. The next evening, after one last check, they brought the printed files down to the legal department for signatures. The hallway was empty, ceiling lights humming softly. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in. The elevator dropped a few floors, jolted slightly, then stopped. The lights flickered, dimmed. The panel froze. Silence. Alyssa pressed the buttons repeatedly, tried the helpline, then her phone. No signal. "Stay calm," David said evenly. He tested the intercom button, waited, then shook his head. "It'll probably restart in a few minutes." "You're not annoyed?" Alyssa leaned against the wall, trying to swallow the tightness rising in her chest. She wasn't claustrophobic, but being trapped made her hands tremble ever so slightly. "Getting annoyed won't make it move faster," he said, sitting down on the handrail step and opening the folder. "We'll wait. If it takes too long, we'll ring again." The air in the cabin grew warm. Alyssa inhaled deeply and loosened her hair to make breathing easier. She hated not knowing which door would open or what was happening outside. David looked up, studying her. He took off his jacket, stepped closer, and placed it on her shoulders. The fabric was warm and heavy, just enough. "It's not that I can't stand strong women," he said quietly. "I just can't stand it when they tremble." Alyssa froze. His words hit the very thing she'd tried to hide. She smiled faintly. "I'm not trembling. I'm just resetting my rhythm." "Then reset," he replied, folding the papers. "I'll be right here." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere, a faint metallic click sounded. The lights blinked and brightened. The elevator shuddered once, then began to move again. The numbers lit up. 16, 15, 14. Each one a small exhale. The doors opened. Cool air rushed in. Alyssa handed back the jacket, saying a brief, "Thanks." They stepped out into the corridor, where the golden light pooled on the floor like honey. She walked half a step slower, drawing a deep breath as her heartbeat finally steadied. They reached the legal office door. Alyssa smiled. Not at him, but at herself. From now on, whenever an elevator closed around her, she'd remember. Sometimes calmness is the only key that opens the door. And that heart that had skipped a beat, she would place it back where it belonged, at least until tonight's signatures were done. Monday morning started with a whisper sharp as a needle. "Did you hear? Alyssa's seducing the CEO." That needle flew fast, through hallways, elevators, coffee machines, and landed on every desk in the building. It traveled faster than email and lasted longer than any memo. Alyssa heard about it after lunch. One of her teammates approached carefully. "Hey, maybe don't check the company forum today." "Why?" "There's a clip." Someone posted it. "What clip?" "You giving that presentation in the meeting?" Then it cuts to the elevator doors opening, you and the boss walking out together. "Edited?" "Obviously, but it looks bad." Alyssa opened her laptop. The video was less than 15 seconds long. The angle was off, the lighting poor, and a faint watermark said "source unknown." She watched it once, calmly, a second time silently, a third time, then closed it. People expected her to explode. She didn't. Instead, she felt empty, like someone had quietly pulled a brick out of the wall inside her chest. That afternoon, a few women huddled near the office pantry. When Alyssa walked by, the whispers paused, then resumed right after her steps passed. Soft as paper cuts, but sharp enough to sting. "Thought she was special. Guess she's like everyone else. Did you see the way she looks at him?" Alyssa didn't turn around. She wasn't afraid of gossip. She just hated how it turned people into lazy judges. Worse still, she hated the feeling of betrayal, that someone had twisted the truth to fit their own comfort. That night, she stayed late at the office. The hallway was quiet, the lights warm and dim. She stood by the window holding two thick folders, watching the city below blur into golden gray. Behind her, footsteps echoed. She turned. "David." He stopped a polite distance away and nodded. "The revised terms from Hoshinari." "I've sent them," she cut in. "You know about the clip?" "I do." Silence. "And you said nothing," she added. David didn't answer right away. His face stayed calm, but there was something darker in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Alyssa gripped the folder tighter. Her voice was steady, cold, but steady. "Thanks for proving that powerful men are all the same." He didn't move, didn't argue, didn't sigh, didn't even frown. But his eyes hesitated, like there were words caught behind them, too heavy to push out. That silence made her even colder. "I'm not asking you to explain," Alyssa went on. "I just thought you'd say something. Even a simple, 'Don't worry about it.'" David finally spoke. "If I said, 'Don't worry about it,' would you? At least I'd know whose side you're on." He pressed his lips together. The gray in his eyes deepened. Not anger, just something restrained. Something he didn't trust himself to let out. Alyssa gave a small, brittle smile. She nodded once, as if closing a file. "We have work to do," she said, stepping past him. The faint scent of sandalwood trailed between them. "I won't let a cheap video ruin our project. But don't expect me to pretend nothing happened." She walked away, her heels soft but certain. At the corner, she paused for half a second, just long enough to realize her chest felt heavier than it should, like she'd been holding a glass of water that suddenly turned to stone. That night, the whole building seemed smaller, each window glowing like tiny squares of light. Alyssa worked in silence, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Every word on the page was in place, except the one thing inside her that wasn't. David passed her desk twice without saying a word. The third time, he stopped behind her for a moment, then walked away. When he turned back briefly, his eyes carried something the rumors could never describe, a quiet, aching truth that had nowhere to go. The next morning, whispers changed again. Now they call her the girl who dared to challenge the boss. But this time, the nickname carried a shadow. The girl who challenged him just to get attention. Alyssa walked straight ahead. She didn't slow down. But deep inside, a fine, thin line had already been scratched across her heart. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. By the third day after the video surfaced, a new message appeared in the company's internal announcements. Disciplinary notice. Termination of employment for NT due to falsifying and distributing edited media, causing serious harm to an employee in the work environment. Below it was a short apology from the board, addressed by name, Alyssa Sutherland. Alyssa read the email twice, her heart both lighter and strangely surprised. She hadn't known there was even an investigation. In her inbox was another message. Policy update. Effective immediately, sharing or creating false content is strictly prohibited. Any defamation will be dealt with promptly. Signed, David Sterling. She sat still for a moment. The sound of keyboards from nearby desks seemed louder than usual. She opened her calendar. No meeting invitations from David. No messages. No quick, "I took care of it." Only the quiet evidence of what he'd done. That afternoon, Alyssa went down to HR to print a form. On the receptionist's desk lay an open folder, the disciplinary report. The top page listed source verification, account tracking, timestamps, witness statements. Underlined at the bottom, submit to CEO for same-day approval. "Oh, Alyssa," the HR officer said, looking up. "I meant to tell you last night, but it was too late." He signed it right away and sent out an internal apology with the new policy. Alyssa paused, then corrected herself. "The CEO didn't say anything else?" "No, just left one note. Do it properly, fairly, and fast." Alyssa thanked her and walked out, the paper still warm in her hand. Passing by the glass corridor, she caught her reflection. Same face, same posture. But her eyes looked lighter, and she suddenly understood. His silence hadn't meant agreement, it had meant action. Quiet, decisive, and final. That evening, the building was almost empty. Streetlights shimmered on the glass windows like streaks of rain. Alyssa stopped outside the CEO's office and knocked lightly. "Come in," his voice called from inside. The room was bright but soft. A small lamp glowed on the desk. David looked up from a stack of papers, closing the folder as he stood. "What is it?" Alyssa stepped closer. No preamble. "I read the email. I saw the file, the signature too." David gave a short nod. "Yeah. You could have told me," she said evenly. "I didn't need saving. I just needed to know you believed me." The room went silent for a long moment. Outside, a car horn drew a thin line through the night. David rested a hand on the edge of the desk, his expression calm but thoughtful, searching for a few exact words. Finally, he spoke quietly. "I didn't save you. I just couldn't stand watching someone hurt you." Alyssa froze. The word hurt slipped through her coat and landed somewhere deep beneath her ribs. Her throat felt warm, but her tone stayed steady. "Next time," she said softly, "just one sentence would be enough to let me know you're there." David nodded slightly. "All right, next time I'll say it." He paused, then added, "But first I'll act." The sentence was simple, so simple it couldn't be misunderstood. Alyssa let out a slow breath, realizing she hadn't breathed properly since walking in. She looked at him, saw the faint fatigue under his eyes, the trace of 3 long days spent fixing everything without saying a word. His gaze didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't expect praise. It was simply the look of someone who had chosen a side. "Thank you," she said quietly. David gestured to a chair. "We still have the Hoshinari appendix to review. Sit down, let's finish it." "Now?" "Now." Alyssa smiled faintly, just a small curve of the lips. She sat opposite him. The paper open, pens touched down, pages turned. The space between them stayed the same, yet something invisible had moved. Just a little. Enough for someone who had doubted to stop doubting, and someone who had been silent to start learning how to speak. Near midnight, as Alyssa reached the door, she turned back. "I don't break easily from rumors." "I know," David said, But I don't want you standing alone when they hit. She nodded and left. The hallway stretched long and soft under the yellow light. Inside her, the sharp wire finally loosened. Her heart felt warmer than it had in a long time. The rumors had shrunk to shadows, and silence, when used right, could become its own kind of protection. They flew out early in the morning. The Boston sky was crystal clear, as if freshly washed. From the airplane window, the city stretched out below, red brick rooftops and a cold river slicing through the middle. Alyssa sat by the window, and David sat in the middle seat. They didn't talk much. Each wore headphones, reviewing the final version of their presentation on their laps. The hotel was near the harbor. Their rooms were on the same floor, at opposite ends of the hallway. They dropped off their luggage and headed straight to the rented meeting room for a run-through. Swivel chairs, a large screen, and 2 bottles of water set neatly on the table. Alyssa plugged in her laptop. David checked the list of potential, rapid-fire questions from the board. The afternoon passed with the steady sound of typing. Evening crept in slowly. They ordered dinner upstairs, clam chowder and warm bread, and ate quickly at the work table. Then they bent back over their screens. Outside, the ocean wind whispered against the windows, like someone speaking softly. Near midnight, the words on the screen began to blur. Alyssa rubbed her eyes and stretched her back. David was the first to close his laptop. "That's enough. Push it more, and our brains will be useless tomorrow." They went downstairs and took a short walk outside. The air was salty and cold. Boston at night was gentle, like an old friend. They sat on a bench in front of the hotel, watching the golden streetlights pour along the road in a thin stream. Alyssa was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke, steady, as if narrating to herself. "When I was little, I used to ask my dad, 'What if I fall?' He'd say, 'Sweetheart, learn to stand firm first. When you know how to stand, falling becomes a lesson, not a disaster.'" She smiled. "My dad didn't have much, but he gave me a straight back." David listened. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair. He asked softly, "How's he doing now?" "Still planting cuttings in empty milk cans, still brewing coffee too strong, still telling me not to be afraid of anything." She paused, eyes distant. "I hate being arranged by other people. Maybe because he taught me too well how to stand on my own." After a moment, David said quietly, "I used to be in love." Alyssa turned to him. He kept his gaze straight ahead. "She said I was too unfeeling. It wasn't that I didn't see or care. I just handled everything like a problem to solve instead of a person to hold. And then she left." He smiled faintly. "It took me a long time to realize that sometimes silence itself is a mistake." The wind slipped between them, cold but soothing. Neither spoke. The city didn't rush them. No one had to pretend to be strong just now. "If you could go back," Alyssa asked, "I'd talk more and slow down." "Slow down for what?" "To listen to my heart, not just my logic." Silence again. Alyssa rested her hands on her knees, staring at her fingers. Slowly, David reached out and brushed the back of her hand, lightly, like asking to borrow a moment of calm. She didn't pull away. The touch was gentle, but it warmed her spine. "We should sleep," Alyssa said, standing up. "Tomorrow will be fine." "Yeah," David replied. "Tomorrow will be fine." They walked back through the lobby, each to their room. The door closed behind her. In the dark, Alyssa lay a hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat settle. Though something inside had shifted, just slightly. She didn't name it, only breathed deeply. Across the hall, David leaned against his door for a moment before turning on the desk lamp to review one more slide. Not because it needed fixing, but because he wanted tomorrow to feel just right. Boston was quiet that night. They both slept late, but their sleep was steady. The business trip had only just begun, yet already something inside them had quietly changed places. The presentation began at 10 a.m. The partners' meeting room was bright and cold. Alyssa delivered her part neatly and clearly. David tied every point together like the gears of a clock. Questions came fast, but they handled them in sync, without a stumble. When it ended, the board chair nodded. "Impressive. We'll send our confirmation letter within the week." Outside, the wind was stronger than the night before. As they crossed the street, David leaned slightly to shield Alyssa from the gusts. Neither spoke. but the faint smiles at their lips matched, relief and a quiet pride. That evening, they stopped by the small hotel bar. The music was soft, the lights amber, the scent of wood warm and simple. They ordered wine. The glasses clinked with a gentle ting. "To a good day," David said. "To a perfect team," Alyssa replied, her eyes brighter than usual. They traded light stories, odd dishes they'd tried, trips that went wrong, old friends. Nothing deep, but enough to make them laugh easily. The wine was gone. They ordered another. Alyssa's cheeks flushed pink. David had softened too, less guarded, less sharp. "Thanks for today," Alyssa said. "You did your part brilliantly." "So did you," David replied. "And thank you for being in Boston with me." In that moment, silence floated between them like a small boat. Alyssa leaned forward and kissed him. No warning, no question, just a decision from somewhere she didn't want to name. The first kiss was short, tentative. He kissed her back. The second was deeper, steadier. They forgot the bar, the clock, everything but the taste of wine and the warmth between them. David was the one who stopped first. He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing slow, as if holding the fragile line they'd just drawn. "Alyssa, yes? If I keep going, you won't be my employee anymore." The words pulled them back to earth. No anger, no chill, just truth standing quietly between them. There was still work, still other people, still rules that, if broken, would hurt her more than anyone. He knew that. He wouldn't risk it. Alyssa stepped back half a pace. Her face was still warm, but her eyes had cleared. She nodded slowly. "I understand." They sat a while longer, talking about nothing, trying to lighten the air. When they stood, David walked her to the elevator. "Get some rest," he said. "You too," she answered. The doors slid shut between them. On her floor, Alyssa leaned against the wall. It felt like someone had placed a small stone on her chest, not heavy enough to stop her breath, but enough to remember. She wasn't angry. She understood. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. The next morning, David was back in his office, self-precise, composed, words clipped short. He kept the perfect distance. In the lobby, he nodded like he would to any colleague. She nodded back, polite, measured. They checked out and headed to the airport. On the plane, they sat as before. Her by the window, him in the middle. No personal talk. They reviewed some notes, then put on their headphones. Outside, clouds spread endlessly white. Inside, Alyssa could still taste the warmth of last night's wine, still feel the trace of his lips. But on the surface, she sealed the memory tight. The plane landed in New York under a pale golden afternoon. They rolled their suitcases through the terminal, exchanged polite goodbyes, and walked separate ways. The next day, work resumed. Morning coffee, brief meetings, emails, calls, reports. When they met in the hallways, they nodded. In conference rooms, they spoke just enough. No lingering looks, no accidental touch. Everything looked as if nothing had happened. Yet whenever they stood side by side before the glass wall overlooking the city, something small would ache inside. Quick, quiet, but real enough to remember. Weeks passed in the same silence. Alyssa worked better than ever. David maintained his perfect professional distance. Late afternoons, as the office emptied, the ceiling lights fell into square pools across the desks. Alyssa stared at those pale squares and realized a relationship held too tight becomes a box, and she didn't want to live in one. That Friday night, she sat alone at her desk and typed a few short lines. Subject, resignation letter. Body. To avoid conflicts and to preserve fairness for everyone, I will be leaving Sterling Group 2 weeks from today. Thank you for the opportunities and lessons. She read it once, then hit send. The email window closed. Alyssa stood and took her coat. Outside, the night wind swept down the avenue, carrying a faint, damp scent. She pulled the office door shut softly behind her. At the far end of the hall, David had just turned off the conference room light. His phone buzzed once. He looked at the screen, reading the short subject line. For a few seconds, the room stayed dark. Only the green exit sign glowed. He stood still, hand gripping the table's edge, then let go. Tomorrow they would both go to work as usual. But tonight they knew what their hearts already understood. No one can control pain forever. And sometimes, leaving is the only way to preserve the best part of what you shared. Monday morning began like any other. The hum of the coffee machine, the soft rhythm of heels on carpet, a few quick greetings between coworkers. Alyssa arrived earlier than usual. She tidied her desk, a few paper clips, color-coded notes, and a small plant that had finally turned green again after months of care. She ran her fingers along the edge of the desk, as if touching the path she had just walked. A new email window blinked open in the corner of her screen. She typed a single line, her final message to the company. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not so easy to control." No long explanations, no justifications, no blame, just a farewell that felt true to her. Alyssa pressed send, shut down her computer, and slipped her employee badge into an envelope. Before leaving, she stuck a small note to the side of her plant. "Water on Wednesdays, don't forget." The elevator doors closed, reflecting her face in polished steel. She smiled faintly. The kind of smile that comes when you finally remove the weight pressing on your chest. At the lobby, the guard greeted her. She nodded, pushed the glass door open, and let the morning breeze touch her skin. Upstairs, David stood by the window, looking down at the city. His phone buzzed. He opened the message. Just one line, so short he read it twice. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not so easy to control." He didn't move. His eyes drifted away from the screen to the misty skyline. For a moment, scenes returned, the late nights facing each other across the table. Brief glances that said more than words, her light laughter that left thin marks in the air. And that night in Boston, the kiss he stopped halfway, choosing rules over emotion. He realized then, the only thing he could never organize, calculate, or contain was how he felt about her. The secretary knocked. "Your 9 o'clock meeting, sir." "I know," David said quietly. The door shut again. He stayed still, not to decide, just to accept. He didn't run after her, didn't call, didn't send a message. Not because he didn't want to, but because he understood Alyssa hated being begged to stay. She left for freedom, and if he truly loved that strength, he had to respect it even if it hurt. Later that morning, David walked through the office. He stopped beside her desk. The chair was empty. No sticky notes, no jacket draped over the back, no small green plant. That little space suddenly made the whole floor feel colder. "She's really gone?" Jamie asked softly, hand frozen on the mouse. "Yeah," David said. He rested a hand on the back of her chair, then pulled it away. The silence of the empty desk spoke louder than anything he could say. Something inside him slipped, not an object, but a quiet support he hadn't realized he leaned on. That day, David worked on usual meetings, approvals, and decisions. No one noticed a pause or mistake. But when night came and the lights thinned across the building, he returned to his office, opened his laptop, and stared at his inbox. No new mail from her. Of course not. He closed the screen and leaned back. The ceiling above him felt wide and hollow. Loss didn't roar. It simply left a person-shaped silence behind. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he stood, took his coat, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned back for half a second. Nothing had changed, yet everything had. He knew with calm certainty that the most important thing he'd ever had just slipped away. Not because he let go, but because he chose to respect her freedom. Late that night, the city breathed evenly. In a small apartment not far from the company, Alyssa opened her window, letting the wind move the curtains. On her desk lay a new calendar, blank and waiting. She wrote on the first page of the month, "Begin again." Then she capped her pen, turned off the light, and lay down. Sleep came easily, the deep kind that only visits people who finally paid a debt to themselves. The presentation ended after the city had lit up. On their last night, Boston's wind slipped along the brick row houses, tinged with a faint salt smell. People drifted back to the hotel, small groups chatting, then scattering, the sound of footsteps thinning over stone. Alyssa leaned against the railing in the small courtyard behind the lobby, a cold glass of water in hand, watching the warm yellow windows across the street. She wasn't thinking about scores or victory. Only one thing clung to her mind, that line in the conference room, when David pointed toward her, saying her name in a way that made the whole room hold its breath. The glass door behind her clicked open. David stepped outside. He stopped a few paces away, as if preserving an old boundary, and spoke in a voice light but clear. "If you want silence tonight, I'll be quiet. If you want to talk, I'm here to listen." Alyssa turned. The warm light softened the familiar angles of his face and gentled the gray of his eyes. She drew a breath, set her glass on the railing. No more circling around. "What were you going to say?" David stepped a little closer, still keeping a respectful space. He chose his words like tying a gift, wanting it secure but not knotted too tight. "You once said I couldn't stand women like you, but I can't stand being without you." The words dropped between them like a stone, sending wide ripples across the flat water inside Alyssa. The night seemed even stiller. A potted sapling beside them stirred. A distant horn sounded, as if it had been tucked away in a pocket. She looked at him for a long time. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that hid nothing and covered nothing. "And I once thought you only knew how to control people. Turns out, you're just very good at keeping your word. A second, two." The smile thinned into a calm line. The past months flickered through her mind like an old reel. Brew and bean, try me tonight. The stalled elevator, the disciplinary email, Boston's cold wind, the empty chair at Sterling, the one-line letter, this afternoon's bid meeting. Together they formed a small house, its door opening to let them step in. David came closer. No more stiff self-control. No more pretending indifference. He stood facing her, close enough that she could hear his breath, see a frayed thread on his cuff. He lifted his hand, hesitated midair as if asking, then went on and set it on her shoulder. A light gesture, backed by a large decision. "I've learned to add one more sentence," he said with a faint smile, eyes never leaving her. "But I still believe, what you say, you do." "So do what?" Alyssa teased, her voice as soft as wind and leaves. "Be the one who stands beside you, not above you. Be the one you call when you're happy and when you're sad. Be the one who won't leave you to face life alone, even though you can stand very firm." Alyssa was quiet. The tenderness in her chest took a long path and came back, warm as a hand pressed to a stove's glow. She tilted her head and murmured, "I don't need someone to prop me up. I need someone to walk with me." "I know." The distance left between them was short enough that half a step would close it, but they stayed still, as a way of honoring what had passed. No one rushed, no more debts of explanation, no need to promise the sky, just presence. "One more thing," David said, slow and steady. "I'll send a letter withdrawing from this project if the client insists we work as one team. I don't want anyone saying you got anything because of me. If we collaborate, it'll be because they choose you and you choose them. If not, we'll still live well." "I understand," Alyssa nodded. "But as you said in the room today, some things don't need to be controlled. They just need to be called by their right name. What's the name of tonight?" David smiled. That smile was as rare as a clear day in the rainy season. "It's let's not be without each other anymore." She laughed, small and true, as if a door inside her chest swung open and a cool breeze rushed in. "All right," Alyssa said, "but do you remember this line? If I keep going, you won't be my employee anymore." "I remember," David said, his gaze deepening. "And tonight, you are not my employee. You're the woman I love." She closed her eyes for half a second, opened them, and looked straight at him. Then she stepped forward, erasing the last space. He stepped in and held her. This time, there were no boundaries. No elevator, no conference room, no cold, dry emails. Only warm skin and a familiar scent that suddenly turned into the scent of home. The kiss came like something natural that had simply been postponed. Not rushed, not too light. Just enough to know that all the long days, the silences, the missed beats, had led them here. David cradled her nape, his thumb brushing behind her ear. Alyssa's arms went around his neck, and she felt the muscles in his shoulders loosen, like a rope slipping free of its nail. "Crowds scare me," she whispered when they paused. "Not because of what people say, but because sometimes I can't believe in my own magic." "Then let me believe with you," he said, "and remind you to believe." A gust rattled a nearby lighted sign. Inside the lobby, a staffer slowly shut the glass door. The world shrank to the covered patio where two people held each other without wondering about tomorrow. Because tomorrow they could face. Tonight they only needed to confess. They were tired of being without each other. When they left the courtyard, they walked side by side. No one clutched the other's hand like they might get lost. But at the elevator, Alyssa reached first. David laced his fingers with hers like placing a small hook to keep both ends of a cord together. "I'm flying back to New York in the morning," he said. "Tonight, if you're free, let's have dinner somewhere that needs no control. Just show up, sit down, and laugh." "I'm free," she smiled. "But you'll let me choose the place." "No controlling." "I understand, don't possess. Like you taught me." The doors opened. They stepped in, standing side by side. The elevator light cast a small halo on their foreheads. The numbers ticked down. Neither spoke. The quiet was the same as at the start, but this quiet didn't frighten. It was a thin blanket laid over two people who had finally stopped feeling cold. That night, Alyssa slept in Boston without dreaming. David did too. If there were dreams, they were probably walking down a road, not hurried, not slow, hand in hand, knowing they didn't need more trials to prove anything. Enough, they believed. The next morning, the sun rose over the river. They exchanged a short goodbye in the lobby, each to a different flight. No need to make plans, because the plans were already in their hearts. As the plane lifted, Alyssa watched Boston shrink below and felt as light as if someone had just slipped a clip out of her hair. In another seat, David held his phone, typed a short message, deleted it, then smiled and sent nothing at all. Because tonight they would speak by meeting, and from that moment the late-night confession became a new anchor. Everything could change, but let them not be without each other anymore. 1 year later. New York stepped into early summer, the sky crisp and blue like a freshly peeled apple. The glass building hosting the anniversary party carried a simple white banner. Year 1, light and honest. No fireworks, no flashing signs, just warm lighting and long tables lined with white flowers. On the small stage, a modest sign read, A&E Small Ventures. Alyssa straightened her dress. Not a ball gown, just a clean, black sheath. She held a glass of lemonade, circling the room and greeting faces who had weathered a difficult first year with them. A bakery owner, a woodworker, a woman running a family pastry brand, a 10-person tailoring shop. They were all recipients of the A&E Fund, a foundation she and David had co-founded for one reason only, to help small businesses stand tall. "Director Alyssa," the bakery owner beamed, wrapping her in a warm hug. "Thanks to you, our ovens ran non-stop this season. Our bread didn't even have time to cool." "Thanks to you for baking good bread," Alyssa replied, eyes bright. "I just stood beside you." From the doorway, David walked in. White shirt, sleeves rolled, tie in his pocket. He didn't need to play the boss here. He was the co-founder who shook every hand, remembered every name. When he spotted Alyssa, he paused for half a second, just enough to look, to smile, to let both their hearts meet in that quiet, steady rhythm they'd perfected. "You tired?" he asked. "I'm happy," she said. "Even the tired parts feel good." They stood side by side for a while, watching the room glow like a big, friendly kitchen. The past year had been like walking through a forest, hard, winding. But now the path was clear. They had left the cold race behind for a slower, deeper journey, where money wasn't metal, but a bridge for someone to cross to the other side. The host tapped the microphone, and the room gently quieted. On the screen behind the stage, photos began to play. Flower-covered hands, freshly painted doors, new signs in the faces of small business owners, smiling with teary eyes. A soft guitar tune filled the space. "Let's welcome our co-founders," the host said. "Alyssa and David." They walked up. Alyssa spoke first, as usual. Short, steady, sincere. She talked about the bakery that kept 3 workers employed through the rainy season, the carpenter who restored the old church door in his neighborhood, and the small loan that helped a young woman open an art class at home. She paused, eyes shimmering but dry. David took over. He rarely spoke long, and tonight was no exception. He thanked their quiet partners, named each one, then lowered the microphone and turned toward Alyssa. The room fell still. like the old coffee shop long ago, just before a line dropped like a coin into a cup. He slipped an arm lightly around her waist and said, loud enough for all to hear, "She once said the boss couldn't handle her. Turns out she was right, because now she handles me." Laughter broke through the room like soft fireworks. Those who had lived through gossip, doubt, and questions understood. It wasn't a joke. It was truth told through humor. Alyssa looked up at him, her gaze half teasing, half grateful. She leaned in and kissed him. Not long, not awkward, just a perfect punctuation mark on a sentence written over a year. She whispered in his ear, just for him, "Try me tonight, remember?" The lights seemed to glow warmer, as if someone had added a layer of gold. Applause filled the air again, this time mingled with the squeals of children running between tables, the kids of small business owners the fund had helped. A little girl with pigtails stopped mid-run and asked her mother, "Who's that lady?" Her mother bent down and said, "The one who helped keep our shop lights on." The child didn't fully understand, but she smiled, and that smile was answer enough. After the ceremony, the music picked up. David and Alyssa moved from table to table, listening to new stories, accepting honest hugs. Sometimes their eyes met across the crowd. No signals, no whispers. They were fluent now in the language of not controlling, of simply understanding. When most guests had gone, the city poured another layer of cool breeze over the balcony. Alyssa held a cup of hot tea, both hands wrapped around it for warmth. David leaned on the railing beside her. "A year already," Alyssa said. "Feels like a joke." "But it held like a vow," David replied. "Remember the line, 'Understand, don't possess'?" She tilted her head. "I remember, and I've added one, 'Trust, don't force.'" "Good," she smiled, "because I still need your trust, not your pressure." They stood quiet for a while. Below, car horns stretched like ink lines. Above, a few stars glimmered behind glass towers. David took her hand. Not tight, not loose. Their heartbeats brushed through skin. "When do we go back to Brew and Bean?" he asked. "I owe you a proper introduction." "You didn't introduce yourself last time," Alyssa laughed. "You just said, 'Try me tonight.'" "And now," David shrugged, "I still say it, but it means something else. Try me, every day, not just tonight." "Deal," she said, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. "I'll try you, every day." From inside, someone called for a group photo. Alyssa set her cup down and turned. David followed half a step behind, still holding her hand. They stood in the center, smiling at the camera. The flash went off, sealing 1 year, and many more to come, into a single frame. When the guests had gone, the room exhaled back into quiet. They were the last to leave, checking for forgotten purses, jackets, or scarves. David flipped the switches one by one, lights fading like the tide retreating. Only the green hallway lamp stayed on. At the doorway, Alyssa turned back, her gaze landing on the empty stage where the A and E Small Ventures sign still hung straight. She said softly, "I think that old joke did a lot of work." "Yeah," David replied. "It opened a door. The rest is up to us." "Then let's keep walking," she said, squeezing his hand a little tighter. "Try me tonight. And every night." "Every night," he echoed, sealing the promise like a signature that needed no paper. They stepped out into the street. The summer wind was gentle, the sky clear. The city lights no longer dazzled. They shimmered like salt scattered over the sea, just bright enough to show the way. They walked side by side, shoulders brushing, no need for words. Because everything had already been said, every promise already kept, and what remained was simply to live together, hold each other, and laugh whenever someone recalled. She once said, "The boss couldn't handle a girl like me." And David would always answer, half joking, wholly true. "She was right, because now she handles me." They laughed, a warm, unguarded laughter that chased the chill from the night. And that old joke at last had fulfilled its purpose, becoming the beginning of a lasting love, one built on respect, honesty, and two people who knew how to stand strong together.